All right, Jen, I think we're live. Do you want to turn on your camera and your mic?
Hey, hey.
There we go. Welcome, Jen. Thanks for joining us for Outbound 2.0. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Awesome. So you're out of the Chicago area, right?
I sure am. Out in the burbs, the rainy Chicago burbs today, but I'm here.
It's it's the same here in Knoxville today. Not awesome weather. Just like I hate that 50 degrees and rainy. Like, but yeah. But awesome. So our guest today, Jen. Jen's done everything from enterprise sales to brand evangelism. She's now heading up community, one of the most interesting startups in our industry, Lavender. So excited to have you on. Even more excited that we're going to be talking about something other than sales or marketing slash demand gen here. Obviously, community content very close to my heart. But excited to have a little bit different angle on it than what we've done for the majority of these. So cool. Before we hop into it, like, give us just a quick kind of background. What are you guys doing at Lavender? What's primary responsibility and goals relative to your role there?
Yeah. So Lavender is essentially an AI email coach. So as you're writing, it's flagging you on all of these things we sellers tend to do that get us no replies. So think like big long sentences, words that we use to sound smart, buzzwords, subject lines with numbers in them. It's not writing it for you, though there are prompts where we can help you personalize and connect you quickly to that information, but it's helping you become a better sales email writer over time. So I joined the business 1 month and 6 days ago, coming from a 18-year career in sales. So this is my first time doing a true marketing job, and my focus is on community and partnerships here.
Awesome. Awesome. So it sounds almost like a sales focused Grammarly that you guys are doing.
Yeah, if you think about like Grammarly meets Gong, the kind of category we're creating is email intelligence. So it's been really
That's
fun. It's
awesome.
my first time working in SaaS and tech and learning a lot, Googling a lot, but having a good time doing it.
Awesome. So, I mean, you said something that was interesting. You're in partnerships, or sorry, community. Well, one, let's break that down because this is like the third call I've been on today where we've been talking about community led, sales, marketing, demand gen slash partnerships. And in some cases, they're like, oh, it's the same thing. Like they're equivalent to each other. Others, it's like they're similar. They're two sides of the same coin. Others are like, hey, those are radically different things. So like, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, and honestly, my first exposure to community was probably Rev Genius. Like that was the first time that I was ever like, what is community? I keep hearing this word. And then late last year, Will Aitken, Nick Capozzi, and I stood up a community called Social Social, which was really kind of just figuring out all these questions that we have around, what is the algorithm telling us to do? And how do you show up here? And what equipment do you use? Like we were just looking at each other saying, there's got to be other people asking these questions. And so, candidly, my exposure to community is probably newer than even people on this call. So, I will share my interpretation of it. By no means is this like a hard and fast rule. But the way I think about it is community to me represents any place where our customers, buyers, users are going to learn and have conversations. I also, admittedly, like didn't even start using Slack until October. We were always like an old school Outlook and Teams organization. And so what I'm observing is there's all sorts of different places, both formalized and or unformalized, that people have communities. I think the partnerships piece is sometimes partners just already have the communities. And so I think there's where it makes sense to explore, do you stand up your own community or do you tap into communities of other partners who are working with the same client? So I know that's kind of a long answer, but that's sort of how I've been thinking about it thus far.
Yeah. And how are you guys navigating that dichotomy of trying to stand up or encourage your own community versus engagement with other communities?
Yeah, this was actually something I was super intimidated about when I was speaking with Will Balance and Will Allred, and they were talking to me about this job. I said, I can give you 10 names of people that have done this before. I've never built a community outside of social, which is still relatively small. So I don't even think I'm the right person for the job. And one of the things that they said was, it's not about the like mechanics of building the community. It's about how you show up with the people in our community and the trust and the credibility that you earn. So they were like, we're not hiring you for expertise on Slack or anything like that. Thank God. What we're doing is we've seen how you show up in channels where our users exist. And that's what we want to build out. So I think one of the things that took the pressure off is I was under the assumption I would come in and I would have to stand up and build a community right away. And I'm very grateful that their advice was, don't build a community until you observe and watch and participate in how our users are showing up in other communities and other platforms, so that you can then, after a couple quarters of doing that, have a very clear answer as to what are they not able to do in the communities that they have access to now, so we can fill a gap, as opposed to let's just stand up like another Slack channel for the sake of standing up a Slack channel.
Thank God you guys are coming at it that way. Uh, so, I mean, in your month and how many days, what have you seen that people are doing wrong and right out of this?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm in any position to judge if someone's doing something wrong or right. I will say, however, I think this term, and you shared it before we hopped on, of community-led growth is becoming one of these buzzwords, right? And so
Mhm.
anytime there's a buzzword and there's popularity behind it, what does everybody do? We're like, let's just put resources to it and let's jump on the bus. I get a little, like, maybe where I do get a little judgy is I'm like, we don't always need our own community per se, not just so you can check that box and say, look, we're doing it. And so I think that's probably the bigger mistake that I see. If you cannot say there's a defensible thing that people in this community can do here that they can't do anywhere else, like, to me, that would be the precursor question I'd want to ask before I say, let's go dump the resources, the time and energy in standing up a community. Because like, I look at what y'all have built and it's incredible, but it doesn't happen overnight just by doing it. Right.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like what you're seeing right now within, the markets and everybody doing announcements around AI. It's like AI is now hot, so everybody has to have their AI play, whether it makes any sense at all, whether they have any idea what they're going to do with it. It's just like, hey, we're doing that AI thing. One of my one of my favorite onion pieces that they ever did. They did a video back when everything was, cloud just started being a buzzword, and so they did a video, and it was like HP is doing that cloud thing, and it's absolutely hilarious. So if you haven't seen it, definitely look it up because it is so spot on.
Um,
It's like, but yeah, and I mean, it's absolutely true. Like everybody's like, oh hey, outbound sales, traditional demand gen, all of these things sort of just broke all at once. They had, those of us paying attention had seen it coming and that it was, becoming less and less effective. But then all of a sudden, it's like the wheels came off the bus. And so everybody's now looking for the next thing. What can they do to try and backfill that and all of that stuff? And for a lot of people, it seems like community led growth is like that thing that they're going to try and latch on to. But yeah, part of what you're alluding to out of this is like community is hard and it's complicated. And there's a lot of different ways that you can play it. And so I think the piece that's missing for a lot of companies is like thinking that through to execution, or even thinking it through to like what are our actually goals relative to community. And
yes.
so where are you guys in that process? I know that you're early within that, but what are some of your goals or thoughts around how you're going to try and configure and leverage community led growth?
Yeah, and I love what you just said, because I think the other thing it feels like maybe is happening is companies are saying, "What can community-led growth do for us?" As opposed to, "What can we do for our community?" And so I think that part of the thing that's hard is you have to earn trust and credibility with your community, right? So just because I set one up does not mean people are going to come to it. I think one of the challenges is making sure that you deeply understand what is it that your users, your buyers, your customers, your prospects are trying to learn. Where are they currently going to learn? And what are the shortcomings of that? So where I'm at right now is we're really fortunate, right? Not everybody sells to salespeople. We do. We sell to sales and marketing and CS. So LinkedIn is a big fat, like, green
Yeah.
field for us. I know some people selling to CIOs don't have that, but there are no matter who you sell to, there are places where your prospects and buyers congregate, and they congregate there to learn. More often than not, they're congregating to learn about the problem and not about the solution. And so what I'm spending my first quarter doing is, as it relates to community, like, we are so blessed to have all of these really happy users talking about new and unique ways that they're using lavender that candidly, as even as a user of lavender prior to coming in, I would have had no idea. Like, we heard from one the other day where they were saying, "I struggle with OCD, and this helps me have confidence and not overanalyze my email again and again." If I was not spending time in LinkedIn looking at those conversations, I would have never known that, right? Because it's not something I personally struggle with. And so right now it's like watch and listen mode for me. I'm watching as to how people are using it, what are the jobs that they're trying to accomplish, and what are the things that they're not assuming we can help with that we might be able to. So it's a lot of just watch, observe, participate, ask questions, and then get to know our users before I'm ever going to touch anything around standing up a physical community.
God bless you. I
Well,
mean,
I've been lucky to talk to Jared and y'all too. I'm like he's like, "Do not be one of these people." I'm like, "Yes, I'm gonna take your advice."
No, I mean it's something that's really hard for a lot of partners that we work with and people that want to engage with community to get is not only is that not a great way to build network or a visibility within community, and is it not particularly effective at trying to drive like a sales conversation or an opportunity or whatever, but like it can actually be self-defeating within it. It can really put a bad taste in people's mouths, and it's really hard for a lot of people to understand, like, and to look at it as this non-transactional thing. Instead it's trying to do the next right thing, trying to provide value, trying to help, and trusting that out of that the good things are gonna come naturally. And so it's nice seeing people having to wake up to that a little bit, but holy crap, is it a struggle for a lot of people. uh,
Yeah. I
and
think
it's
also the thing that people don't consider is, like, what makes you wanna share word of mouth? It's anything that makes you look smart or funny. Right? And I think we have to tap into that. Like, yeah, we can have the, like, most helpful, informative information, but if we're not having any fun and it's boring and it's dry, like, am I gonna lean in there or am I gonna lean into the place that achieves both of those things? So I think those are other things I'm trying to think through as well. Is you don't want it to be like you're not gonna go to a party that sucks with a bunch of boring people, just like you're not gonna go to a community that sucks with a bunch of boring people and boring topics.
Absolutely. I mean, and thank God we picked up Adriana on our side,
Yeah.
who's killing it on that front. Like it's awesome whenever you find somebody that has that inclination and actually gets it and really drives engagement and all of that stuff. So but I think we've touched upon one of the big challenges and probably one of the big reasons why it's hard to get people out of that transactional mindset, especially relative to the macro environment and stuff that we're looking at right now, which is you've got all of this pressure from above, whether it's your direct manager, your C-suite, your board, your investors, whatever, that everything has to demonstrate ROI right now, and you have to be able to actually attribute and all of that stuff. And what we're talking about here doesn't necessarily lend itself that well to that type of strategy and that type of framework. So what's your take on how you navigate that?
So I love this question. I personally would never want to work for an organization where measurement took priority over impact. And I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says that's what they think, but that is what, in my interpretation, that is how that message, how I received that message. So I will say back when I was working at Challenger, we did not have a formal community per se, but like again, I don't necessarily think you have to say like, here's our Slack group or here's our group. You can build community out in the ethos.
Right.
I had, a podcast. It was called Winning the Challenger Sale. It's still up. And every month I took different problems that I knew as a seller were hard. Like, how do I run a group meeting or how do I write an email that doesn't get a buyer to roll their eyes? And we were teaching to those topics through the Challenger lens. The intent of that was to go out there and say, I don't care if you buy Challenger or not. In fact, none of the people listening to this are going to buy Challenger because this is for sellers, not sales leaders. But the intention behind it was to say, if you give, people will share if it's smart, funny, helpful. Right. And it was one of those things where you can't track if someone's listening to a podcast. You can see number of downloads. You have no idea who those people are. But when you change that field on your demo request form or your contact me form to say, how did you hear about us? What we started seeing was a huge shift in how many were saying LinkedIn or the podcast or word of mouth. Actually, word of mouth was number one above anything. And I think we just have to look for, is it happening? We have to be so careful not to try to measure it, because word of mouth is like, how the hell do I know if someone's at a barbecue, if they're telling their neighbor about it? Like, they're probably not going to write that down. But if I see word of mouth, I know that's a signal that we're doing something right because people are talking about it. So I think, and to kind of summarize it, like, I want to look that it's happening, and I want to resist the urge to say, let's understand how and where and why it's happening, because some of that is just happening in the dark. And I've been lucky to work for leaders who look at the world that way. But to your point, not everybody does. I candidly could not operate in that kind of a system.
Yeah, but I mean, I think part of what you said there, which is really, really key, it's you're still measuring, you're still tracking. It's just it's not that straight line direct attribution. So, you can still say, hey, look, we have a lift, and it's a lift by, more volume in different channels. And we can then say, okay, and you can actually start to model and extrapolate some of this stuff. And so it's not going to be as like pretty and straight line as a lot of business leaders like it to be, where it's like, hey, this touch drove this lead that turned
Yeah.
into this opportunity and turned into this much money and that ROI out of it. And that's a big part of what I have to try and educate, our partners with here over at Rev Genius is like, you got to get out of that transactional model of it. Like, it's, one, it was never a very good or effective model to begin with. Like, now it's straight up broken. But here's how you need to think about that. Here's how you need to get a little bit more sophisticated with it. And here's how you actually go and present that to your board, to your managers, and be able to say, like, this is how I'm going to measure. This is how we're going to see whether it's effective. This is how we're going to see whether it moves the needle. And you need to get comfortable with the fact that I can't point to specific deals and say that came from this, but I can point to it and say, like, here's your correlations. Here's your leading indicators around this. And this is how, you need to be comfortable with it, because at this point, like, the old model is not working very well, where, we're going to load people up with people to dial or send emails to, and they're going to reply to it. And now we know exactly what drove what.
Yeah, and I think even so at my last organization, what we started doing is we put a drop down for, I had a formal role as evangelist. You don't need to have a formal role as evangelist to do this, but when I would get someone in my DMs on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, you just posted about a problem. It's exactly the problem that we have. I don't know that I want to buy Challenger, but can I pick your brain about the problem?" And so we would put that as the lead, like it would be evangelist lead source. And then I could track where and how those deals progressed. And it was wild. Like, we could get down to this started in a DM conversation, right? But to your point, could I tell you how that person got connected to me in the first? No, and who cares? Like, it's kind of like not the point. But I think, there's a happy middle ground where we just have to have a little bit of faith that if people are talking about us, that's a really good thing. And so let's just look to make sure it's happening. Let's not try to understand every element and facet of how it happened to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean, same story. I've managed the BDR teams, SDR teams under marketing, growth demand gen at pretty much every company that I've worked at, which is still shocking to me outside of the norm. But one of the things that I had to get my arms around and then be able to explain and get everybody comfortable with was the fact that most people out there are like me. Like, they would prefer to go spend, twice as long banging their head against the wall with somebody's terrible website to go place an order
Yeah.
versus pick up the call and talk to somebody. And it's the same story. Like, the thing that may have gotten their attention, whatever, may have been the effort by that rep, but they're still going to come to the website and fill out a form. And so, like, trying to connect those dots from an attribution standpoint, whether it's on the community side of things, whether it's on the evangelism side of things, whether it's on the outbound side of things, like, it's gonna be impossible to connect those dots all the time, and arguably the majority of the time.
First of all, I just have to say, like, that is exactly who I am. When I was standing up kind of my side business, I was trying to buy a website, and I sat on this chat for almost 2 hours, and my fiancé was like, "Just call." I'm like, "I will do anything to avoid a physical conversation." So I feel you there. I feel you there. And that but that I think is our opportunity, right? If we can catch someone where they're learning, when they're learning with really helpful content that is actually not solution centric whatsoever. Like there was an example actually, I think it was Spotify. I was thinking about standing up a separate podcast and I was googling it and Spotify had done this amazing article that was like here's everything you need to know start to finish about what it takes to stand up your own podcast. And they didn't start talking about the hosting platform until like number 15 or 16. It was just looking at the higher order job to be done. And because they were so helpful, that's where I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go here because they clearly understand their user and can help their buyer. So I think if we think about it like that, right, if we create content with that in mind, and then we share that in communities where people are trying to solve problems, that's a great way to drive pool into our business.
Absolutely. Whoa, is that you or me that's
Sorry, that's
going off?
mine.
Okay. I was like, "Is that mine? Oh god." Yeah, and, the content piece of it obviously is important. So, like, I would dare say a lot, maybe the majority of people listening to us whenever we talk about community-led growth or community engagement, stuff like that, they're thinking about having conversations directly with people. But the content piece of it is absolutely critical and essential, and it allows you to do to let the content do a lot of the legwork. You don't have to be there and be part of every conversation. If the content's good, then it's going to get out there. It's going to get into those conversations. It's going to drive conversations. And so, what's your interaction with your content or marketing team relative to this? And how are you guys strategically leveraging
Yeah, I don't know if it's strategic or not, but I'll tell you how we're leveraging it.
that?
So we our philosophy is sort of, um, only create helpful educational content in nature about the job to be done. And when we do that, ungate it with the belief system that if the content is good, it will drive people to us. It was another thing that I really admired about this. And because let's be honest, like I spent my entire career in sales, I had all of these assumptions about marketing. And I was like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to be talking about MQLs and gating things and like frustrating our sales team. And so a big part of why I came here is because that thinking is non-existent. So the way that we kind of work and have been working in the last month together, because we all started in the last month at the same time, is right now we're looking at what are the different types of personas of people that use lavender. And then within that persona, what are the things that not only they're being measured against, but what are the things that are really, really hard for them, where there's a lot of conventional wisdom that sends them in the wrong path. So, like one, for example, might be SDRs are often held to a activity metric that is unreasonable, unhelpful, and ends up with a ton of calls that are essentially just wastes of time for salespeople. Like if you look at our marketing team, half of us are actually former sellers. So people think it's like, oh, you're just hiring creators and it's a creator led strat. It's not. What their intention was is to hire people who did the job and can bring that to our marketing effort and can bring that context. So we've got like half of our team is really, really good at the true marketing aspects of like how you write great content and how you produce great videos. And then the other half of us are sort of supplementing. Here's what made that job hard. Here's what I was always told by my manager. And here's why that didn't work. And so you blend those two things together. And I think what we can do and what we're excited about is give content that doesn't just help the person with that job, but helps that person manage up and say, I know you've been asking me to do this. Here's a credible organization, and here's what they see in their data around why that doesn't work. And so I think we can pull from our own experiences as to what are those difficult conversations where you need data to defend, like pushing back on a boss.
And I imagine that you're leveraging the community and the engagements there to help inform that on top of what you guys are bringing to the table internally as well.
Yeah, and this is where I really admire how this business has approached it is because we again, we hired a bunch of creators, we all have public personas. We could just put our names and faces and everything, but that's not the approach. The approach is to say, let's take users and customers and say, let's put you as the platform. Like, you overcame this really difficult thing. We want to give you that platform to shine and show others how you did it. And I think there's like, obviously we've had a really fun last couple of weeks on LinkedIn and stuff. But what we're starting to see now is some guy said, look, I posted a post about what Lavender was doing with your marketing. And the next day I posted a post about having my first baby, and the Lavender post outperformed the baby post. And we're like, that's not what we want. But if we can give back to our community by saying, like, there's a lot of people trying to build their personal brands and trying to make a name. So if we can give them a very public platform that would take them a long time to build, to showcase themselves, like, that to me is a cool thing. 2 years ago when I was starting off on my own creator journey, I would have loved to have had an organization do that for me. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
And quick aside, you mentioned the activity metrics and requirements for a lot of BDRs and stuff like that. Holy crap, was that a early lesson I had to learn as a manager of BDRs? Like, be careful what you set as their criteria, their KPIs, because boy, will salespeople maximize what they're doing relative to that. And so, like, if you set the wrong thing, you're going to find them doing all kinds of stuff you don't want them to do. Like, heaven forbid you do it based on number of calls. Because, like, if you go into that room, it'll be a lot of dial. Somebody picks up. How quick can I get off the phone? Like, forget like the conversation I'm having. I don't care. You guys are judging me on number of dials. So it's like their worst thing that they could have is somebody pick up. They're like, oh God, no.
I'm just trying to hit my metric. I'm not trying to have a conversation.
Right, exactly. So yeah,
But
be really careful what you hold them accountable to, because that is what they will optimize against.
On
Huge.
that point, just quickly, I heard a really cool idea, and I'm regretting that I forget who said it. It was not my idea, just so I'm clear. But someone had this idea of, instead of trying to give someone a really high metric, you give someone a low one. So you say, like, you can only make 50 calls, or you can only send 50 emails, so that they have to make the most of every one of those interactions, which I was like, sure, there's some downsides to doing it that way. But I love the philosophy of that, right? Is to, like, treat everyone like there's meaning behind it instead of just mindlessly calling to hit a metric. Anyway.
I love that. I had
Yeah.
not heard of anybody doing something like that, but I really, really like that one. Cool. So one of the things that you talk about is creating mega fans around brand. Unpack that a little bit. What actually goes into that? What are you actually talking about whenever you talk about mega fans?
Yeah, so to be clear, I think the product creates the mega fan, but we create the megaphone for the mega fan, right? So, like, you can't make up for a bad product that doesn't do what it says it's supposed to do and doesn't help the buyer. But if you can check that box, right? The next thing to do is, how do you get someone to want to cheer you on? Because there's a lot of choices for where they spend their time. And this is something, again, I want to be super clear. Like, I didn't build Lavender mega fans. When I came into this company a month ago, there were already a ton of mega fans. But if you look at what our founders have done, is they've recognized the importance of being present where our users are, which again is LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And so they showed up and they had conversations around the things that were hard, and they gave and gave and gave. And I think it was a really different approach than a lot of founders take, because it wasn't like, I'm a founder, I'm above you, Mr. or Mrs. SDR. It was, they were literally reaching out and people were asking them questions and they would help them. They would do coaching sessions and say, we can get back to Lavender, but let's just coach you on what a good outbound email looks like. So that was one thing. The second thing that they did that I really admired, and this is what attracted to me to them in the first place, is they made it available for free for job seekers and students. So they said, let's look at the people that are going to use this product, and let's look at the moments that they're scared and it's really hard. And let's figure out a way that we can be there for them. And I think one of the things, just as a result of all the layoffs and things that have been going on, like, it is really touching when you tell someone who's struggling and just unexpectedly got laid off that, hey, you can use this for free and there's no strings attached. Like, that is just like that's a mega fan moment, right? So I'm not saying everybody has to give their product away for free. Obviously, everybody has different circumstances and situations. But I think looking to say, where can I give in moments where people really need you? And it's not just Lavender. I've seen a bunch of companies doing this really, really well lately.
Yeah, I mean, it was arguably the most effective thing that I did when I built out our partner network at Cirrus, the first B2B SaaS company that I worked with. I went out and talked to, we were Salesforce integration. So, the only people we could sell to were people using Salesforce. So, one of the very first things I did was went out and talked to all of the partners, all the consultants within, the Salesforce community, because of course they've got listings for all of this stuff. All that information's out there to go mine and be able to do. This was before you could, most of us knew how to scrape anything. So it was like, okay, I'm just going to click through on all of this stuff. But I had more conversations with partners than I could count. And the top two things that they wanted was, one, to make sure that the product did what it promised because they wanted to look good. And two, they wanted to be able to use it. And so that's what we wound up doing. We gave it away to everybody who was a Salesforce consultant, a Salesforce partner. We spent a lot of time on calls with them, with their clients, like, how do we do this, whatever, with no guarantee, no requirement for a sales conversation, no nothing. It was just like we were there to support the partner ecosystem. And I believe, deep in my heart, even though that straight line attribution piece was always damn near impossible, that was one of the biggest things that we did early on. That was the secret to our success, was going and doing that and supporting that partner ecosystem, which by extension meant that we were supporting the bulk of the Salesforce ecosystem.
Yeah, I love that, and I think, even if you can't physically give away a product like you and I were able to, if I reflect on my experience at Challenger, there, it was you can't give Challenger away. There was no, like, individual courses, but we did say is, "Let's give so much that people are like, 'Why are you not putting this behind a gate?'" And so the whole podcast was essentially being like, "Here it is. Here's how challengers do this. Here's how they do this. Here's how they do this." And I think people are expecting you at some point to be like, "And give me your money." And so when you don't, it's a mega fan moment, right? And then that person said, "Is if this is what you're willing to give for free, like, what is the experience like of working with you?" And I think, it's this really tough decision I think businesses have to make around how much do you wanna hide and, like, keep, hidden from them versus how much are you willing to open up and say, "We're gonna teach you what we know about this problem with the belief system that you're gonna come back to some of you are gonna come back to us and want more." So even if you don't have a physical product, you're selling a service, you still know a ton about that problem. How can you give, 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 give to your community? Because I promise you that creates pull.
Oh, it absolutely creates pull. And I mean, the dirty little secret, and hopefully most people are not being motivated by this, but a big reason why it creates the pull is it creates a feeling of reciprocity. You've given something away of value, and human nature means that we are strongly, strongly encouraged internally, like, we've got to do something to return that favor. I mean, it's literally the foundation of human interaction and community. And so, you know that's how and why it works. But again, like, I think if you get motivated or focused on that side of it, you're going to be right back to like a transactional quid pro quo. But at the end of the day, like, that's from a psychology standpoint, from a sales standpoint, that's what you're leveraging whenever you do that. So like, there's clear reasons, and we actually understand why this works. But it's kind of cool and kind of ironic that, like, no sooner do you start trying to look at it through that lens, then now the effectiveness of it falls apart.
Yes, and I love that you raised that because it's just one of those things we overcomplicate, isn't it? Like, human psychology is there's not different rules in sales and marketing, it's the same stuff, and if we just really lean into that and say, like, what makes someone wanna share, what makes someone wanna give, we don't have to sit in 18, whiteboard sessions and try to figure it out. Like, let's make it a little bit simpler and think about what motivates us as human beings. So, I love that point you raised around reciprocity.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I assume you guys are heavy power users of lavender internally and eat your own dog food.
Yes, yes, and actually, I will tell you this really quick story. So when I first heard about lavender in December 2021, I was covering for a sales manager that was out on a sabbatical. And when I was working with the SDR team, they were really struggling to write emails that get responses. So I saw lavender and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna bring them in And I talked to Will Allred and I was like, hey, here's the situation. Like, we need our SDRs to hit outbound numbers. They're not hitting it. I really like lavender. Can you use it for him? And he goes, yeah, but why don't we try putting one of your emails in there? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I've been selling for so long. I'm great at writing outbound emails. So I put one of my emails in there that I was so super proud of. And this thing came back with like a C score because it scores. And I was like, this is not for me. This is for SDRs. And it was a really eye-opening moment because I had this belief it's just for SDRs. But after using it, I saw that like I shortened my email from this down to this and I got a much better reply rate. So yes, like I don't care how long I've been using lavender, it's still catching things. I'm very long-winded in my writing, just like my talking. So yes,
Oh,
I do use it.
if Jared is sitting in, listening in on this, he's going like, "Yes, Jason, you need to use this. Stop being so long-winded."
It's hard. It's the curse of confidence, right? Like the more you know, the more you're like, I'm going to tell them this, this, and this. It's like, you don't need to say all that down. You don't need to.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm absolutely cursed because I'm all but dissertation for a doctorate in philosophy. So it's like, talk about somebody who's trained to be like long-winded and complicated. It's like this is my entire background.
Join the club. There's many of us. Don't worry.
But yeah, I went out on that limb because it's clear in the way that you talk about the product. It's clear in the way that you talk about the users. I would go so far as to say like it's really hard slash damn near impossible to create mega fans if you're not eating your own dog food, you're not using your own product, and you're not, the first tester, the power user of it, whatever. And companies that I've worked at where we ate our own dog food. I mean, back to Cirrus, like we built that product because we needed a Salesforce connector for Gmail. It was like we were looking at it. It was like this process, this workflow sucks like switching between tabs and copying and pasting. And it was like there was an Outlook connector. It was like we need one. And so like we started building it for ourselves. And then it was like, okay, there's a lot of other people that are making the switch to Gmail. And so we built it first and foremost as a tool for us. And just turns out that, by doing so, it wound up being a tool that was valuable for most of the Salesforce community. And so, had a very similar experience. And I've worked at other companies where it was like, we didn't touch the product. And it was like, oh God, like it was especially from a marketing demand gen standpoint, like trying to bridge that gap to the end user, to the use cases, to the pain points was so hard because you didn't have that first party hands-on experience with it to be able to gather that and get those insights.
Yeah, I actually am so glad you raised this because I wasn't thinking about this, and this is such an important point. So thank you for raising it. I think there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, but lavender's selling to salespeople, so it's easy for you. And sure, it is, right? Like you can hire a salesperson into marketing who understands the jobs to be done, what makes it hard. It's easy. But I don't think that in today's day and age, we can get away with that excuse anymore. Like if you just go Google let's say you're selling to CIOs, right? Like Google CIO podcasts. You can sit there and listen or read transcripts of what CIOs are talking about with other CIOs. You can go to meetings and forums and join communities. Like there's just too much information sharing for us to be like, oh, I'm not a CIO, so there's no way I could know that. You have a CIO probably at your own company. Like ask them. But I think what you raised is such an important point because if you're not a salesperson selling to a salesperson or a marketer selling to a marketer, it is so essential that you get to that level that you described of truly understanding the jobs to be done, what makes it hard, and why that's frustrating and how that results in costs, whether it's physical costs or emotional costs, whatever the case may be. But there's no excuse to saying like, we just can't do it. Like you can, you gotta spend some extra time.
Yeah, no, our experience at Astronomer, the company that I worked at most recently before Rev Genius, so we did data orchestration. So it was, the pipes and the ability to plug into all these different platforms and move data around, which, you start talking about that to a lot of people and they just glaze over. They're like, what are you talking about? Including most of the new hires on like the sales and marketing demand gen side of things. I mean, I'll be the first to admit it took me probably a solid 60 days before I was like, okay, I get it. Okay, I know what we're doing here. Holy crap, what a game changer it was whenever I brought on a data analyst that I stole from DraftKings who happened to be somebody that also taught classes as an adjunct around this. So it was like that rare example of somebody that does the data technical side of things and can do it in layman's terms. And so like we started doing like weekly sessions with him and the sales, marketing, demand gen teams. And it made such a difference having somebody that was eating the dog food, using the product, had the experience, and could talk through all of these things. I mean, it was such a game changer for the team to be able to have that insight relative to it.
Yeah, and I think if we look at what we spend most of our time in onboarding and ongoing training on, it's like it's product, right? Like you can afford to kill one product training session to get a customer acumen training session in and bring in that person or one of our customers or someone in the industry that's recognized as a thought leader and just pick their brain about what is hard about the job, not what's like hard about your product. That can be a separate thing, but like the bigger context around you probably don't put what our product solves as job number one. What is job number one, two, three, four, five, six, seven? So we can connect the dots between what we do and how we help with that. But I think like it's just such a miss when you look at these training programs. It's like, at what point are you helping people understand the job to be done from the customer and what makes that hard? Like, let's put some of that in there, please. So I love that you did that.
Yeah, I mean and this is operating under the assumption that they're doing much in the way of training. I mean, holy crap, have I seen way
True.
too many where it's like, hey, here's your power dialer, here's your sequencing tool, here's your list. Like, have at it.
Go. Here's your template. Go.
Oh dear
Uh,
God. I'm actually, I mean, as much as I hate the layoffs and all of the carnage and all of that stuff, like there's a part of me that's happy that the chickens have come home to roost on that a little bit. Like this whole idea. I mean, it was funny. I was having this conversation and describing this to somebody about like the model that everybody had been using for so long of like, hey, I'm gonna go hire people straight out of college. They may have never had a job. They've certainly not had a job in sales. We're going to go put them in a seat, give them, some tech that allows them to do this stuff at scale and say, have at it. And they looked at me and they're like, what? Like we've all been so close to it. It's like we all got so used to it, but like go share that with somebody that doesn't have that level of familiarity and like see their reaction. They're like, this was the model. Like it's like, oh yeah, like
it's like it's outright absurd, right? Like, and this is something when I became the evangelist at Challenger, I realized there is this school of thought that the hardest part of sales is closing a deal. And no joke, like closing deals is hard. I'm not minimizing it. But in my opinion, opening a conversation is the single hardest aspect of sales. And so
absolutely.
what do? We put that in the hands of people that like just found out what their laptop is and like are like literally Googling things. It's so unfair. And the thing that pisses me off is in all these layoffs, it's the people that are executing the strategy that someone else set who are suffering that consequence, right? Like they're following the direction, they're picking up the phone and dialing, they're sending 1,000 emails, and then they get laid off for doing exactly what they were told to do. In my mind, going back to like content and community, you have you have salespeople, product people, engineers in your business that know so much from years of working with customers, and you just let them sit in their own little territories, right? And sell their opportunities. Even if you took once a month to tap that group and say, what are the three biggest things that feel really hard for our customers and prospects right now? Talk to us in your native language about what you're hearing, and then pull that stuff into marketing. Or, like, this is why I'm a big advocate of an evangelist, but like, you have to support these SDRs and these salespeople because it's a completely unfair strategy to them to say, now go break into these companies who are doing anything but spending, but good luck and hit this target. So, yeah, I'm with you. Like it's wild. It doesn't make any sense.
No, absolutely not. So are you concerned at all, sort of back to where we started,
Yeah.
that community-led growth is like a buzzword or a buzz strategy right now? Do you have a concern that that is possibly kind of where people are going as the next easy button, since all the previous easy buttons sort of broke on them all at once?
It's you know what? I love that you call it an easy button because everyone's just always gonna look for an easy button. And I just my opinion is yes. I think that's what everybody sees. And so it's gonna translate into some CEO or founder tapping someone in marketing, being like, go build a community. And like, that's all they get, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to build a Slack group and they're going to be like, I hope people show up and stay. And I will say, like, you obviously and your organization have so much experience here as one of the best communities out there. But even when we
Well,
stood up
thank you.
social, I mean, no doubt you're kind of the one that everybody looks to as the role model. Like when we started social, we had a lot of conversations with people to be like, how much work actually goes into starting a community? And everybody like looked at us with their deep, dark circles under their eyes and was like, a lot more than you think, like a lot more. And so I just hope that before these leaders are asking their teams to go build one, they're having that conversation to understand what's involved in building it, because it's a whole other job, right? And by having that, it means people can't do something else. And really making sure that the something else that they now can't do isn't actually having more of an impact than community and just jumping on the community bus to be on the community bus.
100%. And yeah, I mean, what we're talking about, the ways to do this and execute against it, like it's not easy. Like it's certainly not cookie cutter. Um, and of course, I think way too many within the space are looking for something that is easy. And we're obviously not going to diagnose or fix all of this, but like, how do we, how do people, especially if you're having to deal with like a manager or somebody like that, that is looking for that easy answer and doesn't want to listen to or isn't amenable to like, hey, this is more complicated and we need to think about this. Like we need to, and the other big piece that you hit on that, to call out is we need to go talk to people and listen. And so how do we get the leaders within the space and stuff like that to stop making these easy button choices and looking at things from, I mean, dare we say, a lazy perspective or a lazy approach to it, like, and realize like this takes work, it takes creativity, it takes thought.
Yeah, so I wish there was an easy button for this. There's not, but my my advice here is 2 things. So 1, go into that conversation. So someone asked you to do this, in the next conversation say, "Just so you know what we're saying yes to, I've spoken with other like leaders in the community space, and this is typically the time commitment, the investment commitment, everything that's involved with standing up a community. Now that you see this, community is still something we want to do because we're going to need to pull 3 people off this. We're going to need to spend this. We're going to need to set this up. Like, do you still look at it, right? Because I think there's a certain element of this where community is this unknown, abyss term that people don't know what it means. And so I think you have to really slap someone in the face with like, it's not just plug and play. That's part 1. And then part 2 is going back to that question or back to that ask and saying, sure, we can certainly look into it. But question for you, where do our customers go to learn today? And how do you know that? Because I will tell you, that was one of the questions I would ask sales organizations all the time when I was trying to sell them. It was so funny to me that very few people knew the answer to that. Like, I don't know where they learn. Well, if we don't know where they learn, it's going to be really tough for us to know, 1, what to talk about, and 2, what gaps there are that they aren't getting met by. So we're going to be competing against an unknown competitor. So maybe let's answer that question first. So I think it's all about slowing someone down versus saying like, no, we're not going to do it, but helping them understand what they don't know about what's entailed in a community.
Absolutely. And I mean, on the, top down side of it as well, and trying to get team members to provide that feedback. Like we just went through an exercise at Rev Genius where, we had a lot of priorities and a lot of things that we knew that we had to work on and fires to put out and stuff like that. And then as we started getting some of the operational things dialed in, we wound up in a place where like a bajillion of priorities have been tossed out. And it was like, hey, we should do this, and hey, we should do that, and hey, we should do that. And I started checking in. It was like, oh my dear God, I've got people over here doing this and people over here doing this. And like we've got no coherent like overall strategy and nobody's moving together. And so, we went through an OKR exercise. Okay, the company's 3 top priorities this quarter are this, and we're going to break that out as far as responsibilities and priorities under that and everything like that. But the biggest piece to me whenever you do that is not like, hey, we've gone and mapped out everything that everybody's going to do and here are your tasks, whatever. It's instead, now you've got a heuristic, you've got a tool and a lens to be able to look at anything you're doing and saying, okay, I know the top 3 priorities. How is this moving the needle relative to those priorities? And does it do it better, worse, whatever, relative to other things that are on the plate or being tossed out? And so if you can get your team in a place, whether it's your managers under you as a C-suite leader or something like that, or your actual team members as a manager, whatever. But if you can get them thinking that way and challenge them on that, then you wind up circumventing a lot of these issues and problems. And you can actually start getting to a execution standpoint where like you've got alignment, you've got strategy, and it doesn't all have to come from the top.
Amen. Amen. Right? Like, I think that we're in this mode right now where people are scrambling just to put their fingers in everything. Like, let's do it all because hopefully something will work. And I get it. Like, it's a very uncertain place to be and you want to experiment. But to your point, there are trade offs that you make when you choose to spend time on anything. And if you can't make that linkage that you described, you're just distracting someone from doing something that actually would have high impact. But I think especially for less experienced leaders, I think it's so easy just to be like, well, this thing seems small, go do it, try it, learn from it without understanding what that means that person now cannot go and do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think community partnership stuff like that, obviously, that was key to some of my early stage companies that I started and all of that, and it's been a key to sort of being scrappy, bootstrapped, all of that stuff. Yeah, fast forward to now, like we're all sort of under that model. Now with the current macro environment and the ask from investors and all of that stuff. From your side of things, how do you most effectively leverage that within this context to be able to really scale things?
Leverage what within this context?
Leverage community-led
Yeah.
growth, engagement, all of that stuff to be able to scale and scale, you know, ideally more effectively than you would with some of these other things, especially the stuff that's now broken.
Yes. So I think for us, and this is because we do ask this question in our kind of like demo or team, if you want to try out lavender or whatever, we ask this question so we can see it. What we are seeing is more often than not, it is LinkedIn that's driving people to trial, or it's word of mouth that are driving people to trial. So what we're trying to do now is understand like where are those epicenters of people that are out there just having conversations with the community. Again, the community at large, not our own community, and what are they saying and what can we learn from them as we think about building our own community down the road. So like I'll give you an example. There's two people that are actually, there's a lot of people, but there's two people that come to mind. Gosh, I hope I don't butcher his last name. Kyle Guffey is someone that literally we saw other people posting that Kyle was coming in and showing people how to write better cold emails and referencing back to lavender, and it was in a segment that wasn't a big segment of ours. And it was in, I think, manufacturing. And so we're like, okay, there's clearly a need there. People are going to Kyle saying, hey, how do I think about cold outreach in manufacturing? And so we then say, Kyle's clearly acknowledged as a leader in that thought category. So we can learn from Kyle. We can find ways to bring him in, give him a platform. And then there's another gal, Courtney Wilbanks, she's constantly sending us screenshots of like, hey, this person reached out to me. So when you find those epicenters, I think our job to be done now is looking at how do we involve those people so that we're not asking a lot from them, and the give back to them is significant, because we can sit here and try to message to the world and try to get everybody on the lavender bus, or we can acknowledge that there are these people that have really powerful, influential voices and treat them like people, not like influencers, because we don't do any pay to post type stuff here. We just want it to be organic.
No, I love that. I mean, lean in, figure out how you can support them, how you can enable them, and have that be the primary role and value add there. And I think that's arguably one of the bigger challenges that people have in trying to figure out how to make this entire community thing work, is they tend to wind up in one of two mindsets. It's either, hey, I got to go have a lot of one-on-one conversations with people, and oh, holy hell, how am I going to scale that? Uh, or it's okay, I know how I'm going to scale it. And it reminds me so much of like the very early days of social media and this whole idea like, hey, we're going to use social media in business. And then like everybody's like, what, how are we going to do this? And most people's answers at the time was like, hey, it's another one to many distribution channel. Like I'm going to use social to go shout out my message just like I would in all of these other ways. We all know how that played out for most companies as they did that. And I see on the community side of it, a lot of it kind of coming down to like one of those or the other. And people don't really get, how do you actually effectively use this to scale without going that, route of like, hey, I'm just going to shout into a Slack channel or something like that.
And hope for the best.
Exactly.
And it is cool. I will say even with social, like, in the beginning, you're driving a lot of that conversation, right? You have to prompt people. You have to set an example of like, what should I be asking here? What should I be doing here? How should I be showing up? And we finally saw that tipping point where it was like, now when someone joins the community, other people are welcoming them. They're saying, "Hey, ask this type of question because your job is this." And that was a really cool moment, right? You realize like there's something to this. And we're by no means building a massive community. We're not monetizing it. It was literally just we had a problem. We thought other people probably have this same problem. Let's just stand something up. It's free. Who cares? But I will say it's taught me a lot about how much people are willing to help one another if the belief is there that the help will be returned back at a later date. So I think again, going back to what we talked about before, just like not using a community to take and what's in it for me, but really building a place where people can gain quite a bit, not just from you, but from other people in that community.
No, I love that you talked about that moment that it sort of flipped because it really highlights one of the crucial pieces of community, especially if you're trying to build it, is that at a certain point, and really at the point that becomes like successful or viable or vibrant, it's no longer yours. Like you're
Yeah.
there to sort of nudge it or guide it, but it's now owned by the community. Like you can sort of give it a little bit of direction one way or another, but a successfully built community is its own thing. Like
I
it's
love that. That's so true. I never really thought about it like that, but you're spot on, isn't it? It's like you've built it, but get out of the way.
absolutely, absolutely. So we're coming up on the end of the time. Let everybody know where they can find you.
LinkedIn. I did one TikTok and I'm a one and done TikTok girl. That's it. I can't deal. I'm so scared of haters and all that stuff. So I was like, I'm out. But I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. Easy to find me, Jen. It's demand Jen. But yeah, that's where I spend all my time.
I feel you on the TikTok front. Jared will not let me sleep about like, hey, you got to get on TikTok. We got to do stuff on TikTok, and I'm like, dear God, no. Like, I have two girls, like a 14 and a 10-year-old. It's like they live on TikTok. It's like, no, I'm not going on TikTok.
Candidly, I love TikTok. Like, I love watching TikTok, being on it. I've heard some horror stories that, like LinkedIn, people are associated with their companies. They're not going to be complete jerks. TikTok is like a free reign of just people being their worst human selves. So, no, thank you. I will just scroll through it.
Awesome,
Uh,
awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on. This has been a blast. I've really enjoyed
yes.
this.
Thank you so much for having me. I learned honestly a lot from you in this conversation. So, thank you.
Awesome, awesome. Same here.